Congratulations. You've just been poisoned. Don't panic. You won't feel it right away. The thing about royal toxins is that they're subtle, seductive, like expensive perfumes or political promises. They glide down your throat like silk, then curl inside your belly like a waiting animal. You're seated in the banquet hall, or what remains of it. The ceiling is cracked. The chandeliers hang limp like broken ribs. The walls sweat wax and shadow. But the food, oh the food, is immaculate. Every dish is carved to perfection. Every goblet overflowing. There's a roasted swan with golden feathers. A pie that breathes. A pudding that bleeds if you cut it too deep. You think it's gooseberry. It's not. You haven't eaten all day. That was your first mistake. The queen is watching you. Not directly, of course. Queens never look directly. They let mirrors do that for them. But you feel it. Her presence. The thick perfume of it, like myrrh and mold. You know she's behind the curtain. The velvet one that never moves, even when the wind howls through the windows like a choir of orphans. She never eats during her feasts. She hosts. She observes. She lets others taste the world for her. You reach for your goblet. Your hand shakes just slightly. Not because of fear. Not yet. Because of the cold. The air in here doesn't feel like air. It feels like breath. Someone else's breath. Too close to your neck. Too humid for comfort. You drink anyway. Of course you do. You were raised for this. You were bred to endure opulence like a trained animal. Smile. Sip. Swallow. Compliment the roast. Your tongue begins to itch. But it's not the food, you tell yourself. It's the incense. The incense they burn before every toast. Resinous, choking, blessed by a priest who forgot how to pray centuries ago. It clouds your vision. It bends your memory. Did you just blink? Or was that 10 minutes ago? The man next to you has stopped breathing. You don't notice right away because he's still smiling, still holding his fork like a soldier clinging to his last weapon. No one screams. Screaming is forbidden. Instead, a bell rings. A soft chime. That's the queen's signal. Another course. Servants pour in, barefoot, hooded, gliding like shadows with silver trays. You catch a glimpse of what's on them. Something gelatinous. Something quivering. Something vaguely human. You tell yourself it's lamb. You need it to be lamb. The queen speaks now. Her voice doesn't come from her mouth, which remains hidden behind a curtain of lace and gold. Her voice comes from the walls, from the bones beneath the floor, from inside your teeth. She welcomes you. She thanks you for your loyalty. She invites you to stay forever. And that's when you realize you've been here before. Not this room exactly, but this moment, this taste, this fear. It's in your bones. It's in your blood. Something ancient. Something that remembers being prey. You're not here to feast. You are here to be feasted upon. You look around. No one meets your gaze. Their eyes are glassy. Their lips move without sound. A room full of bodies waiting to be emptied. You try to stand, but your legs betray you. They've already begun to forget how to belong to you. You fall gently, like a curtain collapsing. Someone catches your arm. You think it's kindness. It's not. They're dragging you now. Down the hall. Past the columns. Toward the kitchen. Toward the queen. Congratulations. You've just been poisoned. But the real tragedy? You still want dessert. They say she was born during an eclipse. Not the romantic kind, with lovers hiding in the dark, whispering secrets behind silk curtains. No, this was the kind of eclipse that swallowed light whole. Birds crashed into trees. Pregnant women clutched their wounds and wept. Dogs howled until they choked on their own tongues. The stars blinked and decided not to come back. In that moment, where time seemed to fold inward like a clenched fist, a midwife screamed. Because the queen had arrived. She wasn't a queen then, of course. She was a baby. Wrinkled. Wet. Silent. Too silent. No cry. No gasp. No proof of breath. Just a small, slick thing curled in her mother's blood, blinking without fear. And watching. The midwife did what midwives do. She reached for the child, to swaddle it, to slap its back, to coax it into announcing its presence to the world. But the moment her fingers touched the baby's skin, she collapsed. Not dead, not fainted, just wrong. They said her bones turned soft, like boiled fish. Her face sagged, melting slowly into a quiet grin. She crawled backwards into a corner, curled up, and started humming lullabies to the ceiling. The baby never cried, and no one ever touched her again. As she grew, people started noticing something strange. Or rather, something missing. She didn't cast a shadow. Not in sunlight. Not by candlelight. Not even in the moon's mercy. She moved through the palace like a rumor. People whispered that she had no soul. Others said she had too many, and they canceled each other out. Her tutors never turned their backs to her. Servants kept bowls of salt outside her chamber, and sometimes, when she passed too quickly, the salt would hiss. She laughed often, but never at jokes. When she walked, she glided, like her feet weren't obeying gravity, but negotiating with it. They tried to take portraits of her. Every artist failed, not because of lack of skill, but because their hands would begin to tremble and the ink would run and the canvas would warp. One man carved her likeness in a marble, only to wake the next morning and find the sculpture had turned to ash. He never sculpted again. He forgot how. Her mother, they say, died shortly after the birth. Not of illness, of silence. One day, she simply stopped speaking, stopped eating, stopped blinking. She sat at her vanity for hours, staring into the mirror, repeating the same word, shadow, until one day, she wasn't there anymore. Not dead, just gone. The queen, still a child, was found sitting in her mother's chair, brushing her hair, with no brush. By the time she was 7, people avoided her footsteps. Literally, they would sweep the floor after she walked by, muttering little prayers under their breath. Let the path be clean. Let the ground forget. Let the dust rise in her place. A priest once dared to test her. He pressed a crucifix to her forehead. It melted, and yet for all this she was loved, adored even, with the kind of devotion one gives to wildfires and volcanoes. Beautiful, destructive, beyond question. They called her the moon's twin, the hollow sun, her majesty the absence. No one questioned her power, because no one remembered where it came from. That's the thing about shadows. You don't notice them until they're gone. And by then, it's already too late. Now, centuries later, in the palace that still bears her scent, they say she walks. At night, through the corridors, still without a shadow, still watching. And if the candle flickers strangely in your room, if your reflection seems a second too slow, if your breath fogs the mirror and a second breath appears beside it, it's her, not visiting, just checking in, because the queen without a shadow never truly left. And if you're lucky, she'll forget your name. You were never truly hungry, not like they were. You skipped lunch. You've tried intermittent fasting. Maybe once in college, you went 3 days on coffee and cigarettes and heartbreak. But you've never boiled bark. You've never chewed leather. You've never looked at your brother's leg and wondered what it might taste like. They had. Her kingdom was made of famine, not metaphorical, not poetic, real, viscous, unrelenting, the kind of hunger that bends the spine, fogs the eyes, and turns lullabies into growls. By the time the queen was 5, half the rivers had turned to mud. The cows were gone, eaten, sold, or simply wandered off in search of grass that no longer grew. Bread became a rumor. Soup was just a bowl of heated breath. Mothers would dig in the earth, not for roots, but for worms. They'd press them between stones and call it paste. The famine wasn't natural. Not entirely. Some said it was a curse. Others said it was her. The queen, still a child then, never cried for food. She watched others cry, listened, memorized the sound, but never joined them. She didn't ask for meals. She was offered them. There was a story, never written but always whispered, of how the queen was once brought a bowl of thin stew by a servant girl no older than herself. The girl's hands were shaking. Her bones stuck out like broken ladders beneath her skin. She hadn't eaten in days. As she knelt, the queen looked at her, tilted her head, smiled gently, then poured the stew into the fire. "Let the flames eat," she whispered. The girl starved to death that night, but the queen didn't forget her face. She named her a saint. The famine burned everything: crops, sanity, songs. Whole villages disappeared. Some say the earth cracked open and swallowed them. Others say the queen's soldiers did the swallowing. She had a taste for loyalty, not in the political sense, in the literal one. Those who swore themselves to her were fed. Those who didn't weren't. There was a village called Ivrin, now erased from maps, where rebellion once stirred. They hoarded food, hid livestock, refused her messengers, claimed the queen had brought the famine with her curse. One night, torches were seen on the hills. 100 riders came. No screams were heard. No arrows fired. Just silence. 3 days later, her palace kitchens smelled different. Rich, smoky, satisfying. She fed the court that night. Roasted meat, sweet sausages. Everyone asked where it came from. No one asked twice. Fire was her ally. It kept her warm. It erased mistakes. It cooked things. She was fascinated by burning. She didn't play with dolls. She played with tinder. When her tutors asked her about math, she asked them about the boiling point of fat. When they read her fairy tales, she interrupted. But how long would it take to cook Hansel? They thought she was joking. They laughed. She never did. By adolescence, she ruled a kingdom that could no longer feel hunger because it had learned to feed on itself. Not just the body, the soul. She understood something others feared to admit. When survival becomes sacred, morality becomes optional. That's the lesson famine taught her. Not pity, not generosity, control. A full stomach listens. An empty one obeys. She made sure no one ever forgot that. And yet, there are poems carved into the stones beneath her ruined palace. Fragments of verses no historian can fully translate. Words that seem to shimmer in torchlight. Words believed to have been written by her, long before her legend curdled. One fragment reads, "What they call cruelty was once just my hunger, asking permission. Tonight, you dream of scorched fields, of hands reaching for beneath the earth, of meat that remembers, and somewhere in the distance, a girl with no shadow watches the fire and smiles. You don't remember your first tooth. She remembered all of hers. She kept them in a little velvet pouch, embroidered with red thread. Not pink, not gold, red. Always red. Each time a tooth fell out, she would whisper to it, call it by name, wrap it gently in silk, and place it beside the others. Then she would listen, because teeth talk. At least hers did. She was 7 when the court noticed her fascination. Too old to believe in tooth fairies. Too young to invent something worse. They found her once, crouched beneath the table during a banquet, plucking something from the floor. A molar, still warm, still bleeding. Someone had choked, gasped, slammed their face against the edge of the table, and collapsed. A low-born advisor. Disposable. She smiled and pocketed the tooth. But it wasn't just her teeth she loved. She wanted yours, too. When her cousin arrived at court, a sweet girl with braids and dimples and the soft smell of milk, the queen took her hand and led her to the garden. They returned hours later. The queen's hands were dirty. The cousin's mouth was empty. They were loose, the queen explained. No one asked what they meant. No one ever saw the cousin again. By 9, she had a cabinet, made of ivory, lined in velvet, locked with a key shaped like a tongue. Inside it, dozens, maybe hundreds, gleamed rows of teeth. Some baby small, some cracked, some sharpened, each labeled, each kissed before being placed. When the court physician warned this was a sign of disturbed feminine development, she asked him to open his mouth. He didn't. He couldn't. The next day, he was reassigned to the stables, toothless and humming lullabies in reverse. But it wasn't always violence. Sometimes it was affection. She once gave a boy a kiss under the moonlight. He was a stable hand, honest, gentle, foolish. She liked his laugh, said his teeth were shaped like loyalty. She kissed him once, then again, too hard. When he opened his eyes, 2 teeth were gone. I wanted to remember, she whispered, cradling them like pearls. Teeth are memories, she believed. Proof that something once lived. Bones that faced the world and didn't flinch. She didn't trust people without teeth. She said they had nothing left to confess. As she grew, so did her collection. When nobles died, she requested a token. When traitors were executed, she asked for their molars. When prisoners screamed, she'd murmur, just one, for your queen. They always gave them. Eventually, people began offering them willingly, as tribute, as penance, as proof. A bishop once presented her with a silver box containing his front 4 teeth. For the lady of devouring, he said. She rewarded him with land, a title, and her favorite smile, the one with all her teeth showing. And still, some say it wasn't just obsession. It was hunger, not for food, for memory, for essence. In certain esoteric traditions, especially in the old marsh cults, long banned, it is believed that the tooth holds the final echo of the soul. That even after the body rots, the tooth sings. Quietly, eternally. They called her a necromancer, a soul eater, a collector of voices. Maybe she believed the teeth spoke to her. Maybe they did. Maybe that's why she never slept with her mouth closed, in case one tried to crawl out. Today, deep beneath the ruins of her palace, archaeologists have found a chamber. No light, no exit, only walls lined with hundreds of tiny holes, perfectly shaped, like drawers or graves. Inside each one, a single human tooth, polished, numbered, still warm. And in the center of the room, carved into stone in a childish scrawl, smile for me, forever. Tonight, as you brush your teeth before bed, you'll hear something clink against porcelain. You'll bend closer. You'll see a gap. You don't remember losing it, but you do remember her smile. And somehow that's worse. There are no mirrors in the palace. Not a single one. Not in the throne room. Not in the royal baths. Not even in the chambers of the nobility, where vanity is usually carved into the furniture and polished like religion. You walk the halls and you realize nothing watches you back. You see your hands. You feel your breath. But your face? It doesn't exist here. Not anymore. Some say it began with a scream. A servant polishing a silver tray, who suddenly dropped it and tore her own eyes out. She saw something that looked like her. They whispered, but it wasn't her. Others say it began with the queen's mother, once beautiful, now reduced to a ghost that rattled through corridors, obsessed with her fading youth. She stared into a mirror for so long, the glass cracked from the inside. When the queen took the throne, she issued her first royal decree. All mirrors shall be destroyed. But she didn't say why. They didn't smash them. No, too loud. Too risky. Mirrors bleed when broken, and glass has a long memory. Instead, they buried them, each one wrapped in black silk, sealed with wax, and carried out at night by hooded men with gloved hands and no tongues. They were buried in the orchard, under the fruit trees. Some say that's why the apples grew bitter. Some say the pomegranate screamed. The queen did not fear her reflection. She feared what might be behind it, because mirrors lie, and the queen knew the difference between a lie and a portal. She believed that every mirror was a door, thin as breath, fragile as skin, and behind that door, something watched. Not a demon, not a ghost, another version of her, one with teeth longer than hers, one who still had a shadow, one who remembered. She called it her twin, and she swore it smiled when she didn't. A court painter once tried to capture her likeness from memory. He worked for weeks. He painted by candlelight, eyes bleeding from sleeplessness. When he finished, he unveiled the canvas. The queen looked at him, and said, "That's not me." Then she walked up to the painting and whispered something to it. It caught fire. The painter was found the next morning, curled into the fetal position inside a silver bathtub, muttering the word reverse over and over until his tongue dissolved in his mouth. No mirrors in the palace, but reflections still found you. In the water bowls, in the polished floors, in the pupils of others. There were rules for those who glimpsed the queen's reflection by accident. Never speak of what you saw. Never draw it. Never let it speak first. Because sometimes the reflection moved before the queen did. They say the queen wore veils. Not out of modesty. Not out of grief. But to confuse the glass. If her face was hidden, then the thing inside the mirror couldn't mimic her. Couldn't replace her. She'd walk past windows and they'd frost over, even in summer. She'd glance at polished armor and the metal would tarnish. One knight was foolish enough to polish his breastplate too brightly. The queen looked at him, and the reflection blinked before she did. He didn't survive the hour. Neither did his horse, or his sons, or the woman he once kissed under a linden tree 20 years ago. Because reflections don't kill the body. They erase memory. The queen said, "There is nothing more dangerous than something that looks like truth." And so, the palace forgot how to reflect. Today, if you visit the ruins, if you're lucky or cursed enough to get past the fences, past the guards, past the dirt that grows teeth, you'll find a room. It's hidden beneath the eastern wing. No door, just stone. Inside it, a mirror. The last one, covered in a silk veil, undisturbed, waiting. Sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear something tapping, not from this side of the glass. And if you ever dare to pull the veil back, don't look, don't blink, don't smile, because your reflection, she already has. You don't wear the crown. It wears you. At least, that's how it worked in her kingdom. There were no velvet pillows, no gentle anointing, no trumpets, no doves. Her coronation began at midnight, and it ended with a scream. They called it the Night of Nails, a ritual whispered about in the older parts of the empire, the parts that still believed in ghosts with mouths, in gods with teeth. The crown was not passed from hand to hand like inheritance. It was forged anew, each time, for each ruler, from iron, not gold, not silver. Iron, crude, black, smelling of blood and old tools. Because gold can be stolen, silver tarnishes, but iron remembers pain. The crownsmith was blindfolded, always, not for his protection, for hers, because to look upon the queen before she wore the crown was forbidden. Dangerous, unwise. They brought her to the forged chapel in silence, barefoot, her long veil dragging through soot, ash, and something wetter. She didn't flinch when they stripped her of her ceremonial robes. She didn't shiver when they poured the oil over her skin. They say she spoke just once that night. "Do not make it fit me. Make me fit it." And so they did. The crown wasn't placed on her head. It was hammered on. Iron spikes drilled through the circlet and into her scalp, anchoring the weight of rule directly into the bone. You could hear the thuds echo through the palace halls, slow, steady, like a blacksmith teaching a heartbeat how to bleed. Each nail was a vow. Each nail, a burial. Each nail, a severing for mercy. And when the final spike went in, she smiled, not out of joy, out of understanding. Her coronation feast was unlike any other. There were no guests, no toasts, no music, just her and the body of her father, laid out on a slab of stone, skinned, opened, seasoned. A monarch must consume her predecessor, said the old law, written in a language no longer spoken, carved in a tongue no longer remembered. And she obeyed. They say she didn't blink, that she took the heart first, still warm, still twitching. When it stopped moving, she whispered, "Now I know how it ends." The court wept the next morning, not out of grief, out of awe, because she came out of the forged chapel crown, bloodied, barefoot, and smiling. And behind her, the walls bled. The iron crown became part of her, fused, fleshed in. You could see it from a distance, black iron like thorns growing from her scalp, glinting with oil and dried sin. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a parasite, and it fed on her doubt. That was the trick. The moment she questioned herself, it would hurt. It would burn. It would remind her, you do not wear power. You become its mouth. She never doubted again. Foreign dignitaries called it barbaric, uncivilized, grotesque, but they bowed anyway, because power, no matter how horrific, is magnetic, and hers could collapse a room simply by arriving. There were rituals after the coronation, private ones. Each month, she would return to the forged chapel, alone, to feed the crown. What she fed it is unknown. Some say blood, others say names. But the iron always looked shinier when she came back. In time, she developed an allergy to gold. Couldn't touch it without blistering. Silver made her teeth ache. But iron? Iron made her sing. There's a melody still echoing in the stones beneath the throne room. A low hum, like metal cooling after violence. Some say it's the sound of her crown, still pulsing, still waiting. Today, the crown is gone. Or maybe not. Some believe it's still buried in the ruins. Others believe it's still worn by her in secret beneath the earth. One foolish researcher once claimed to have found a shard of it, fused to what looked like part of a skull. She tried to mail it to a museum. The package arrived full of teeth. Not hers, not the researchers, just teeth, labeled, clean, warm. So if you ever feel a sudden pressure on your temples, a headache that tightens like a circle, a whisper behind your ear that says, "Make me fit it," don't worry. It's probably nothing. Probably. They didn't always scream. By the time they arrived, most didn't have the strength. Their voices had been removed, or rotted, or pickled, along with the rest of them, because in her kingdom, war was never declared. It was shipped in barrels, pine wood, iron-bound, stained with salt and secrecy. No royal crest, no warning, no seal, just a soft knock at the palace gates, and the quiet thud of something inside shifting. It started, as most things do, with a refusal. A neighboring lord, bold, irrelevant, full of horses and hubris, declined her invitation to dine. Worse, he mocked her, called her a butcher in a dress, called her court a kitchen of cannibals. The letter never made it back to her intact. The messenger arrived with his tongue sewn to his cheek, and the ink melted off the parchment. But she understood the message, and she answered. 3 weeks later, the Lord's palace received a delivery. A single barrel, no name, no origin, just a wax seal shaped like a jawbone. Inside, something soft, salted, barely recognizable, wrapped in linen. One hand, 3 teeth. A braid of hair, still warm. At first, the court assumed it was a warning. Then more barrels arrived. 7, then 12, then 19, each containing a different piece of the Lord. Not just flesh, not just bone, but mannerisms. A tongue still curled mid-insult. A foot still poised for retreat. A heart, yes, the whole thing, still clenched in regret. She hadn't killed him. She deconstructed him, like a recipe. From that day on, the queen abandoned traditional punishment. No gallows, no dungeons, no exile, only barrels. She called it preserved justice. It became fashionable in a grotesque sort of way. Her advisors began to guess who would be barreled next. They took bets. Poets composed odes to it. Chefs wondered aloud about the seasoning. The barrels became her signature, her warning, her calling card. Even her allies grew afraid to send letters. Because what if the queen misunderstood? What if she was hungry? Not all barrels were sent as threats. Some were gifts. From vassals desperate to please her. A rebellious cousin? Barrel. A merchant who charged too much for spices? Barrel. A foreign spy caught whispering in the baths? Barrel. One noble even offered himself. Voluntarily. Climbed into a barrel, soaked in brine, closed the lid, and waited. She declined him. Said the flavor of obedience was dull. There were rules, of course. Each barrel had to be sealed under a full moon. Each one had to contain a note, handwritten, with the words, "For her eternal table." If the note was missing, the sender vanished. Not killed, not punished, just unwritten. No one remembered them. No one missed them. They simply weren't there anymore. Sometimes the barrels arrived unopened. Other times they were displayed. Sometimes they were served. There are unconfirmed reports, always whispered, never written, of a grand feast where 20 barrels were brought to the table, opened one by one, and prepared like delicacies. Tongues smoked, fingers pickled, ribs glazed in honey and cloves. And the queen? She didn't eat. She just watched. She listened to the sound of chewing. Even the palace dogs stopped barking when barrels rolled across the floor. They knew. Now, centuries later, historians argue about the barrels. Some say it was all metaphor, political theater, a psychological war waged in wood and salt. Others are not so sure, because during a renovation of the old docks near her ruined palace, workers unearthed a forgotten cellar. Inside, 39 barrels, all sealed, all intact, still cold. Authorities took them away for analysis. The storage facility burned down 2 days later. No remains were found, only jawbones, arranged in a circle, smiling. So tonight, if you hear a soft thud outside your door, if the air smells faintly of brine and regret, if there's a package with no return address, don't open it. Just whisper, "For her eternal table," and pray she's already full. You arrive late to the feast, not by choice. The messenger came at dusk, wearing black gloves and no tongue. Just a scroll sealed with dried blood and the words, "You are expected." You tried to say no, but the horses were already waiting. So you came. The banquet hall is warm. Not cozy warm. Not hearth warm. It's the warmth of breath trapped in velvet. Of candles that have burned too long. Of meat. The ceiling stretches high, coffered and cracked, painted with angels that have begun to rot. Their wings peeled, their halos dim. What has no eyes? There are no windows. Light flickers from chandeliers made of antlers and spine. The shadows move, but never in the right direction. And the queen? She hasn't arrived. Because queens don't arrive. They materialize. The guests are seated. Nobles, priests, generals, foreign dignitaries who have forgotten their native tongues. They do not speak. They do not eat. Their forks are still clean. Their goblets untouched. Everyone waits. Because the queen doesn't eat first. She doesn't even eat last. She eats only if she's pleased. And tonight she isn't. The first course arrives. A soup. Thick. Gray. Bubbling like it has something to say. There's something floating in it. You think it's a mushroom. You hope it's a mushroom. But when you bite into it, it crunches. Softly. Like cartilage. You don't finish the bowl. Second course, roasted meat. Dark, tender, unlabeled. There's no salt on the table. No spices. Only honey, because sweetness masks anything. The servant lays the plate before you. Their eyes are downcast. Their sleeves are wet. Not with sweat, with brine. The meat smells familiar. Your stomach twists. You look across the table and notice. The man next to you, an ambassador from the Western provinces, is missing. His name, his seat, his shadow. But the roast in front of you is bigger now. A bell rings. Low, hollow, not from above, but beneath. The floor vibrates. The table shakes just slightly. And then she enters, not walking, not gliding, spilling. Her presence pours into the room like smoke and perfume and the sound of locks being tested. She wears a gown of red velvet, too long for her body, as if it once belonged to someone taller. Bones stitched into the hem. Her crown, still iron, still nailed to her skull, gleams with something viscous. And her mouth is clean, too clean, like it has already eaten. No one speaks. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't need to. She knows you're here, and she knows you're hungry. Third course, pie. A grand, glistening thing. Crust lacquered in gold. Steam whispering secrets through its cracks. When they cut it open, it moans. Not air escaping. Not gravy. A sound. Somehow wet. The filling is red, and pink, and yellow in parts. You try to place the smell. It's sweet, but also metallic. You chew, slowly, because if you chew too fast, it runs down your chin. And no one wants to be the first to stain the tablecloth. Someone vomits, quietly, into their goblet. No one reacts, because that was the point. The queen smiles now, just slightly. The room warms. The final course never comes on a plate. It comes in a cage, lowered from the ceiling, wrapped in velvet, humming. They unwrap it. It isn't food. It's a man, skin like wax, eyes sewn open, still breathing barely. There's a tag pinned to his chest. It reads, "Critic." She walks to him, touches his cheek, then turns to the table and asks, "Would anyone like the tongue?" No one answers, so she begins to carve. You realize then what kind of feast this is. What's always been. It's not a banquet. It's a test. Each course is a question. Each bite, a confession. And the only way to survive is to swallow. Swallow your doubt. Swallow your fear. Swallow what's put in front of you. And pretend you liked it. Because the queen is watching. And if you refuse the meal, you become it. Later, in your chambers, alone and shaking, you find a note beneath your plate. It's written in a child's hand. It reads, "You passed. Next time bring salt." And beneath it a tooth, still warm. He came from the south, where the sun is gentler and the questions more forgiving. He wore linen robes, spoke in syllables that sounded like water over stone. They called him Varen, though that was not his real name. He had no real name, only titles. Sage, speaker, seer. He believed that words were stronger than violence, that reason could civilize cruelty. He was, of course, terribly wrong. He requested an audience with the queen, not to flatter her, not to court her, to teach her. He had written a scroll, a treatise on ethics and sovereignty, 300 pages, hand-bound, smelled of lavender and ink. It had ideas like, a ruler must not inspire fear, but reverence. The people are the mirror of the throne. To devour is not to rule. He presented it to the queen as a gift. She turned it over, weighed it in her hands. Then she opened it and bit into it, just the edge, just enough to leave a crescent of teeth marks on the leather. She smiled. Flavorless, she said. Still, she invited him to dine. It was an intimate feast, just the two of them, and a long, narrow table. He arrived clean, calm, clutching his little notebook. She arrived barefoot, eyes gleaming with something older than amusement. They did not eat immediately. She asked him questions, not about philosophy, about his body. How many ribs do you have? Have you ever tasted your blood? Do your bones hum when you sleep? He laughed politely, tried to answer metaphorically. She nodded, as if satisfied. Then she rang a bell, and the first course arrived. Brains, not his, yet, cooked in saffron and butter, served in a cracked skull. He looked at the dish, paused, then took a bite. She watched him chew. Is reason still king, philosopher? She asked. He swallowed. Tonight, queen, it dines beside the beast. She clapped. Second course, tongues, dozens, small, braised in wine. He asked if they were lamb. She didn't answer. He hesitated. She leaned forward, whispering. The lamb never wrote poetry. He ate them, slowly, solemnly, as if each bite was a prayer. She asked him about morality next. He spoke of virtue, of restraint, of the divine spark in man. She listened, then brought out the third course, himself. A plate, simple, empty, and a mirror placed in front of him. You have so many ideas, she said. Let's see how they taste. They say he broke then, not into fear, but into fury. He stood, pointed, declared her an abomination, spoke of law, of conscience, of universal truths. She listened, unblinking, then reached across the table and gently placed her hand on his wrist. If you believe in truth, she whispered, then let me show you what it looks like on a plate. What happened next is unclear. Some say he attacked her. Some say he wept. Some say he begged to leave. Others that he begged for more. What is known as this? The next morning, his notebook was found in the royal gardens, open to a single page, written in blood, shaking handwriting. It read, "She does not eat the body. She eats the certainty." And beneath that, the final line, "There is no truth she cannot digest." His body was never found, but sometimes during state feasts, the queen would offer her guests a new delicacy, a slice of tongue or a sliver of heart. And when someone asked what it was, she'd say, "An old philosopher, very lean, full of ideas, best served rare. So remember, if you ever think wisdom will protect you, if you believe intellect can tame the abyss, if you ever try to teach a monster how to be human, make sure you don't end up as the main course. Because in her palace, you don't change minds, you change forms. You smell it before you see it. It slips under doors, leaks through the cracks in the stone, clings to your clothes even when you haven't been near the kitchens. It's not smoke, not spice, not rot. It's fear, boiled. It has a texture, heavy, oily, like breath pressed through cheesecloth. Some call it broth, some call it steam, but those who've breathed it in, truly in, know better. It is not the scent of food. It is the scent of something becoming food. The queen's kitchens are not underground. They are central, built into the bones of the palace, the heart of the structure, always warm, always alive. Some claim the palace was built around them, that long before thrones and feasts and rituals, there was a fire that never went out. And over that fire, something was always cooking. You're brought in for a tour. It's not a request. A servant appears in your chamber. His hands are blistered. He does not speak. He only hands you a linen apron and a note. The queen has requested your scent. You follow the hallways, down and inward. The air grows wetter, heavier. Each breath sticks to your throat like milk gone wrong. You arrive. The kitchens are vast. Not a single room, but a labyrinth of ovens, hearths, boiling vats, chopping blocks, and hanging hooks that seem to sway even when there's no wind. There are no windows, no clocks, no voices, only the rhythm of knives, the cough of steam, and the sound of something crying softly in the back. The head cook meets you. She has no eyes. They were burned out years ago, allegedly in a butter fire. She says it improved her sense of smell. Her apron is soaked with something that isn't blood, but is trying very hard to become blood. She greets you with a nod and places a hand on her chest. "You smell afraid," she says, smiling. "That's good. It flavors the room." You're shown the stock pot. It is not a pot. It is a pit, as wide as a carriage, as deep as regret. They lower ingredients in with chains. Sometimes sacks. Sometimes ropes tied around ankles. You ask what's inside. The cook chuckles. Yesterday's treason. And some turnips. The steam rises. It smells like shame. And cloves. Next, the butchering room. Clean. Polished. Surgical. Too clean. The knives are hung like instruments in chapel. There's a basin in the corner labeled noise. When you ask, the cook says it's where the screams go. Because screams, she explains, if left untended, will ferment. And no one wants sour terror in the stew. You pass a table where 3 men are skinning something. You think it's a deer, until one of them pulls a wedding ring off its finger. Then the spice room. Tiny jars, neatly labeled. But the labels don't say thyme or cinnamon. They say things like confession, memory, second son, pride cured. You reach for a jar marked hope, ground, but the cook slaps your hand. That's for dessert. At the very center of the kitchens stands a black cauldron. No fire beneath it, no lid, yet it bubbles. Thick, slow, like thoughts being digested. The cook walks over, takes a ladle, and offers you a taste. You hesitate. "Paste," she says, "or be tasted." You sip. It's sweet, then sour, then it burns. Not in your throat, in your mind. You remember something you didn't know you forgot. A room, a face, your mother calling your name in a dream. You drop the ladle. The cauldron shudders. That night, back in your quarters, your clothes reek. Not of smoke, not of meat, of you cooked. It's under your fingernails, inside your mouth, in your dreams. The cook whispers recipes and you wake up hungry. Not for food, for approval. You understand now why every servant smiles when they sweat. Why every guard walks faster past the kitchen doors. Because the queen's meals are not just consumed. They consume. Centuries later, when the palace is just ruins and stories, archaeologists will find the kitchen hearth still warm. The black cauldron uncracked. The jars intact. One in turn will inhale deeply and say, "Smells like meat." The others will shake their heads. Because they'll know, that is not meat. That is fear. Boiled. Preserved. Served. Still warm. They called it the red thicket. Not because of the leaves. Not because of the flowers. But because when it rained, the mud turned scarlet. Even now, if you walk its moss-covered trails after a storm, the puddles foam pink around your boots, and something beneath the soil seems to pulse, as if remembering the ones who never walked out. It stood just beyond the palace walls, a forest without birds, without deer, without silence. It didn't creak or rustle. It murmured. The peasants warned their children, "Do not enter the thicket at dusk. Do not speak its name aloud. And if you hear your own voice whispering from the trees, do not answer." They weren't superstitious. They were survivors. Because the red thicket wasn't a forest. It was a mouth. And the queen? She was its tongue. She hunted there. But she never brought hounds. Never wore armor. Never carried a bow. She walked barefoot, in a red cloak, with a knife that had no handle, only a root, and the forest open for her. Witnesses, few and fevered, claimed to have seen her gliding between the trees, trailing smoke, her crown gleaming under the canopy like a shrine no god ever asked for. They said animals didn't flee her. They knelt. They said she spoke to the roots, and the roots answered. They said she once touched the trunk of an oak so old it wept sap that smelled like honey and rot, and murmured, "You have eaten kings. Now you shall serve one." The forest had always been strange, but under her reign, it grew hungry. Travelers vanished. Entire caravans swallowed whole. Boot prints let in. No prints came out. Sometimes, weeks later, their carts were found overturned, empty, except for one item neatly placed at the center, a crown of thorns, or a rib cage shaped like a cradle, or a child's tooth tucked into a leaf. Always something small, always something that smiled. Still, she fed the kingdom. And meat arrived, exotic, tender, rich, forest game, her cooks claimed. But the bones were wrong, too long in the fingers, too flat in the face. And sometimes, the meat smelled faintly of perfume. One soldier, drunk with guilt and spiced wine, confessed to seeing something unholy in the trees. He'd followed the queen once, against orders. He said she reached a clearing, knelt, cut her palm, and bled into the soil. The ground moved. Roots twisted up and dragged something out, a body. Still warm, still recognizable. The forest gives what is owed, she whispered. She carved it where it lay, left the bones behind, took only the tongue. The soldier begged the bishop for absolution. He was buried head first in the chapel floor by morning. The queen attended his funeral, wore black, smiled. Over time, the trees changed. They grew twisted, thicker. Some bore fruit that resembled faces. Others grew bark in patterns that looked like spines. One even grew teeth. A monk once tried to bless the forest. He walked in cross-raised high, returned 3 days later. Cross gone, eyes stitched shut, muttering the same phrase again and again. The root remembers. Scholars believe the forest was once sacred, a pre-royal place of pilgrimage, burial ground, ritual ground, fertility ground. But when the queen arrived, it became something else. Not desecrated, not defiled, claimed. Some believe she never hunted in the forest. She fed it, that the missing nobles, rebels, and trespassers were not disposed of in dungeons, but planted. That the forest grew fat on betrayal. That its trees bear not fruit, but penance. And that every meal the queen served contained something from the soil. Not roots. Regret. Today, the red thicket is overgrown. No trails, no maps, no warnings, only silence. And the sound, if you're close enough, of something chewing. Because even now, centuries later, the forest remembers the queen, and it's still feeding her. He was her favorite, her shadow, her silence. He had no name, at least not anymore. Whatever syllables once defined him were stripped away the moment he spoke in her presence, and paid for it. Not with death. That would have been mercy. She took his tongue instead. Not in rage, not in punishment, in curiosity. It happened early in her reign. He was a gifted soldier, sharp-eyed, spine straight, loyal in the way a blade is loyal to a wrist. He led her archers with precision, could split a coin from 60 paces and pin a man's throat to bark without ruffling his collar. He never missed, and he never spoke until one night. They were camped outside a rebellion-ridden village. Fires in the distance, smoke in the queen's hair. He approached her with a report. He knelt. He opened his mouth, and he called her by her name, her birth name, not Majesty, not Your Grace, but the one name no one was supposed to remember, the one name she had erased. The forest went silent. Even the fire stopped crackling. She turned to him, smiled. "You remember me," she said. "How sweet." Then she reached out, not with a knife, but with 2 fingers, and removed his tongue like one might pluck a petal from a poisoned flower. He did not scream, not out of courage, because she'd already taken that, too. He bled for hours. She kept the tongue in a jar on her bedside table, suspended in brine and moonlight. She said it helped her sleep, that it whispered even in death. He was never dismissed, never punished. He was promoted, personal guard. From that night on, he never left her side. He stood behind her throne, bow in hand, always watching. They called him the tongueless hawk, or just the one who sees and says nothing. No one understood why she kept him. Was it pity? Power? Possession? But he was always there, silent, swift, and obedient. The kind of obedience that doesn't just follow orders, but becomes them. There were rumors, of course, that she loved him, that she feared him, that she fed him the names of traitors in her sleep. Some said she kissed the place where his tongue had been, gently, like an apology. Others said she once asked him, "Do you still think of what you tasted before I took it?" He blinked, and she laughed. In battle, he was a ghost. You never saw him. Only the sound, a breathless thwip, and then silence where a heartbeat should have been. His arrows were never clean. They were dipped in something wrong. Not poison, not venom. Something that made the flesh remember regret. His victims didn't die screaming. They died confessing. One by one, his arrows turned war into opera. Every corpse frozen mid-sentence, as if still explaining why they had betrayed her. He was her executioner, her assassin, her unspoken law. He once shot a bishop mid-blessing, through stained glass, from the roof of another building. The arrow pierced the bishop's throat and left his tongue intact. She had it delivered to the royal kitchens. It was served with cream. One night, during a rare moment of mercy, she offered him a gift. A silver tongue, forged by her blacksmith, inlaid with obsidian veins. She placed it in his palm. "So you can speak again," she said. He held it, turned it over, and dropped it into the fire. She watched it melt. "Good," she whispered. "I like you better when you're mine." No one knows how he died. Some say he was buried with her. Others say he still walks the palace at night. Bow slung across his back. Arrows made from the bones of forgotten courtiers. But one thing is known. In the queen's private chambers, deep behind a veil of dust and time, there is a small, sealed cabinet. Inside it, a jar, still intact, still sealed. Inside that, a tongue, still red, still wet, still twitching. And if you press your ear to the jar, very gently, very still, you might hear it, murmuring, not words, just devotion. It happened on a night no one has fully remembered, because to remember it is to risk being called back into it. The records are scattered, the witnesses hollow-eyed, babbling, or long buried with stones in their mouths. But this much is certain. On the 12th year of her reign, during the festival of blessing, when all were meant to gather and give thanks to the harvest that never truly came, the moon vanished, not behind a cloud, not a simple eclipse. It vanished. One moment, full and pregnant with silver. The next gone, not dark, not hidden, erased. The stars remained. The cold wind blew. The fire pits still glowed. But something fundamental had left, like a breath withheld, like a god who suddenly forgot they were supposed to be watching. The queen said nothing when it happened. She stood at the center of the stone platform, arms spread wide, head tilted toward the sky as if waiting for rain. The nobles watched her. The priests pretended not to tremble. Servants whispered hymns under their breath in case this was a test. But she just stood there and smiled. "The sky has finally blinked," she whispered. The moon had always been tied to her. She was born during a lunar eclipse. She bathed only in moonlight. She claimed the moon whispered to her in her sleep. Instructions, she called them. Some said her reflection only appeared by moonlight. Others said the moon was not a celestial body, but her twin, watching from above, waiting to return. So when the moon disappeared, many believed she had done it, called it down, consumed it, as a show of dominance, or a show of hunger. What followed was the feast of the absence. The queen ordered a banquet, outdoors, beneath the blank sky. The long tables were set with silver, obsidian, and black glass. No candles, no torches. They dined by memory. Each guest was instructed to close their eyes between courses, to chew in silence, to swallow what could not be named. Those who opened their eyes saw things they could never explain. One noble screamed and clawed at her own face, saying she'd glimpsed her mother, trapped in the wine. Another claimed his spoon whispered, "Forgive me," with every bite. No one left the feast clean. After dessert, the queen gave a toast. "Tonight," she said, "we do not reflect. We are not watched. We are free." Then she drank from a chalice made of bone. And everything went dark. Not the usual dark. Not the soft dark of sleep or shadow. This was thick, internal. The kind of darkness that gets behind your ribs and whispers your worst memory in a language you almost understand. What happened that night has no official record. The palace scribes were found the next morning, ink spilled in their laps, eyes cloudy, each one having written the same phrase over and over. "We are the moon now. We are the mouth. We remember what was eaten." Some believe a sacrifice occurred, that one of the queen's oldest enemies, perhaps a former lover, perhaps a brother, was presented alive and whole before the table, and that she made each guest take a single bite, not for sustenance, but for unity. Others insist the queen didn't eat at all, that she simply watched, and that what was eaten was her. The next morning, the moon returned, quietly, pale, a little smaller, some say, as if it had been bitten, and though no one spoke of the feast of the absence again, the effects lingered. Several nobles began wearing mirrors on their backs, so they could always see what was behind them. The palace dogs refused to howl. They whimpered, facing corners, and never recovered. A group of monks sealed themselves in a tower, scratching their prayers into the stone with their teeth. The queen? She seemed lighter, not happier, not kinder, just as though something inside her had finally digested. She began humming to herself, a melody no one recognized, soft, almost maternal, and when asked what the tune was, she replied, "It's what the moon's saying to me." When it was inside, today, astronomers occasionally report sudden, brief flickers in the moon's reflection, as if something behind it has blinked, just once, then gone. And if you stand beneath it too long, eyes wide, heart still, you might hear a single word rise from somewhere deep within your blood. Chew. Beneath every throne is a secret, a forgotten sin, a buried twin, a door. Most rulers keep scrolls there, or gold, or corpses of inconvenient lovers. But the queen? She kept a room, not a chamber, not a vault, a room, and it wasn't hidden behind a tapestry or sealed with wax. It was directly beneath the throne itself. The throne room was a spectacle. Vaulted ceilings, stained glass saints with no eyes, pillars carved to resemble the limbs of saints or victims. When she sat, she seemed to loom larger than physics allowed, like her body hadn't grown, but reality had shrunk around her. And underneath her feet, something pulsed. You wouldn't notice it at first. The hum, the warmth, the almost imperceptible way the tiles would breathe when no one was watching. But those who knelt too long in front of her throne often stood back up changed. Pale, sweating, mouths dry, eyes wide, like they'd heard something whisper beneath their bones. They had. The entrance was beneath the throne's base, disguised as part of the stone, but smoother. Older, not built with the palace. Older, so old, in fact, that no blueprint mentions it. No servant ever cleaned it. And even the queen's scribes left that space blank on maps, as if their quills simply refused to write what was there. You did not open the door. You were invited. The queen descended there often. Alone. No torch. No guards. Just her, and whatever waited below. When asked, she simply said, "Even I must sit at a greater table." A single account exists. from a boy who once fell through a broken tile during repairs and lived long enough to speak of it. He lasted 3 days before dying of dehydration, though his skin remained slick and damp with some unknown residue. He whispered of the room, a chamber made of black stone that felt warm to the touch. Not heated, alive. He said the walls were lined with mouths. Human mouths. Closed. Whispering. That when he screamed, the mouths laughed in different languages, some with accents not spoken in the world for centuries. He said there were no windows, no light, and yet he saw everything. At the center of the room stood a chair, not like the throne above, not jeweled, not carved, simple, stone, smooth, worn down not by time, but by use. He said the queen sat in it, naked, uncrowned, humming to herself. Around her, the mouths began to open, one by one, and sing. He could not remember the melody, only that it made his fingernails fall off. The queen, upon seeing him, did not shout. She merely turned, smiled, and said, "The stone remembers what kings forget." Then she waved a hand, and he was asleep. When he woke up, he was on a roof, alone, with a scroll in his hand. It read, "Do not return. You've already been fed." Some believed the room was her true throne, that the seat above, the one draped in iron and fear, was merely a performance. That true power sits below, in darkness, where the mouths remember every secret ever chewed and swallowed. They say that room wasn't a punishment. It was a promise. Today, beneath the ruins of the palace, archaeologists have tried to reach the foundation, but the stone resists. Every drill bit snaps. Every sensor fails. The floor vibrates when left alone. In 1993, a team lowered a camera through a hairline crack in the stone. It captured 5 seconds of footage, just long enough to show a room, a stone chair, and a wall full of mouths. One of them whispered, "Still hungry?" Then the camera melted. Not burned, melted. They sealed the crack, poured cement, filed the report under geological anomaly. But at night, if you lie down on the floor above it, press your ear to the ground, you might hear something. Not screams, not music, chewing. It began with a letter. It always does, neatly folded, sealed with wax the color of dried cherries, pressed with a symbol not seen in the queen's court for years. 2 arrows crossed through a heart. No title, no salutation, just 3 words, written in ink that smelled faintly of iron. Do you remember? The queen did not smile when she read it. She didn't frown either. She simply paused, tilted her head, then whispered, "He's still alive." No one knew who he was. Not the scribes, not the guards, not the archivist who knew every name ever inked in a court history and had cataloged 1,000 executions, each tied to a day of the week and a preferred sauce. But she remembered, and that was all that mattered. He was a warlord once, before the wars lost meaning, before thrones were carved from kneecaps and treaties sealed with bites instead of signatures. His name is forgotten now, deliberately, erased from records the way one bleaches blood from silk, violently and with heat. But to the queen, he was the only person who had ever made her laugh without flinching, the only one who had ever said no, and lived. They met in a tent during a truce, the kind of truce where both armies are still holding knives behind their backs. He poured her wine. She poured him fear. They shared a plate of roasted figs and spoke about the poetry of mutilation. "You conquer with teeth," he said. "You lead with perfume," she replied. They kissed, and then she ordered a soldier's tongue removed mid-sentence because the sound was interrupting her thoughts. He didn't flinch. She almost loved him. But power has rules, and love was not on the menu. What he proposed an alliance, marriage, peace, mutual dominion, she accepted, smiled, even sent him a gift, a cake warm and fragrant, wrapped in red silk. Inside the cake, his general's hands, still wearing the rings. He did not declare war. He declared promise. They danced at their engagement feast, barefoot, in a hall full of flayed traitors strung like streamers. She kissed him once. Just once. "You're the only man I've never wanted to eat," she whispered. He smiled and gave her a necklace made of his baby teeth. The wedding never happened, because the next day, he vanished. Not dead, not exiled, gone. His army disbanded. His fortress collapsed mysteriously. His name dissolved from every page, as though history had suffered a nosebleed and wiped itself clean. Only she remembered, which meant something was unfinished. And now, years later, he had written her. The queen replied, not with parchment, not with ink, with flesh. She sent him a box. Inside, a swan's heart, stuffed with rose petals and pages, shredded pages of their treaty, soaked in wine, tied with a red ribbon, tucked inside the cavity, a new letter. I remember everything, especially the parts you thought I'd forget, especially your mouth. They corresponded for weeks, each letter stranger than the last. One arrived carved into the underside of a rib. One was written in ashes that only became legible when sprinkled with salt and regret. One contained a single lock of hair, his, and a note. "Pull this, and I'll come undone." She kept them in a box beside her bed and began smiling in her sleep. Then, one day, a final package arrived. No seal, no message, just a jar. Inside it, a heart, still beating. Wrapped around it, a red string, knotted 13 times, each knot pulsed with the rhythm of a name. Hers, over and over. She brought it to the kitchens, asked the head cook to prepare it as tenderly as betrayal. Roasted in honey, stuffed with clove, served on a black plate, no garnish. She sat alone, cut into it, bit, chewed, slowly, and whispered, "Now we're married." That night, she wrote him one final letter, dipped the quill in her own blood, used her index finger as a stamp. The message read, "I ate the part of you that I love the most. The rest is still out there, waiting. Come find me. I'm hungry again." The letter was never delivered. It disappeared from the messenger's pouch. But 3 nights later, someone saw a man at the edge of the red thicket. Tall, cloaked, missing a hand. He stood under the moon, humming a melody only the queen ever sang. And in his chest, a visible space, like something had been chewed out. To this day, deep in the ruins of the queen's chambers, there is a box. Sealed, heavy. When held, it feels warm. And if you place it to your ear, you don't hear a heartbeat. You hear whispers, calling a name no one remembers, in a voice that shouldn't exist. Still loving, still bleeding, still waiting to be eaten. They called it the loaf that sang, or the bread that knew your name. Sometimes, just her daily bread. Whatever name it wore, the story was always the same. It rose, it bled, it remembered, and it was never made twice. You must understand, in her court, food was not sustenance. It was ritual, a sermon, an accusation carved in pastry and sealed with glaze. Meals were never about eating. They were about unmaking. One morning, during the coldest week of a hungry winter, the queen ordered a new dish. Something humble, something common, something no one would fear. "Give me bread," she said, "but give it a soul." The cooks didn't ask what she meant. They never asked. Instead, they obeyed, and they began with flour. Not from wheat, from bone. The bones of former courtiers, powdered fine, mixed with ash, with salt stolen from the tears of imprisoned scribes. Water came from the red thicket's well. Thick, cloudy, slightly warm, even in the snow. They kneaded the dough in silence. Each slap of palm against bread was a confession, each stretch a curse. Then they added the yeast, and the yeast laughed. It rose overnight. By morning, The loaf had doubled in size, then tripled, then moved. They found it twitching on the stone counter, pulsing in time with the cook's heartbeat. One cook tried to stab it. The blade stuck. The dough swallowed it whole and hummed. Another tried to burn it. The oven burst open. The flame wept. Word reached the queen. She came to the kitchen barefoot, hair unbraided, eyes alight with that gentle, terrifying curiosity. She approached the loaf. It shivered. She leaned down, whispered something only the bread could hear. It responded by splitting open, not in a crack, not in a tear, but in a smile. A long, slow, steaming smile. Inside, not steam, not crumbs. Words, written in strands of grain, woven like veins. I know what you did. The queen clapped her hands, laughed like a child. Finally, she said, a bread with memory. She ordered it sliced, thinly, with care. Each slice was served to a different court official. Each slice said something different. Your wife still waits. You never buried the child. The gold is under your bed. One noble began choking before he'd swallowed. Not on the bread, on the truth. He coughed up blood and bits of letters, ones he thought he'd burned. The queen applauded. The loaf became a tradition, not served daily, but summoned when needed. Each time, the ingredients changed. Once, the dough was mixed with milk from a woman who hadn't slept in a decade. Another time, with the ground-up petals of a flower that only grew where executions occurred. Once, infamously, with ink scraped from a banned book written in a language that eats the tongue. But always, the bread remembered. Always, the bread spoke. One year, during a famine, she baked a loaf herself. They say she poured her own blood into the mixture. That she used the ashes of a love letter never sent. That she stirred it with the bone of her mother's hand. She baked it under moonlight, alone. When she sliced it open, the bread simply whispered, "You're not done yet." She ate the entire thing. After that, no one asked for mercy at dinner. Not because they expected cruelty, but because they feared the bread would tell the truth. There is, after all, a mercy in being devoured. But to be known, that's worse. Years after her death, if she ever died, a monk claimed to find a loaf in the ruins of the palace, wrapped in linen, still warm, still breathing. He took it home, refused to eat it, but one night curiosity bloomed. He sliced it open, found a single word written inside. What? He hasn't spoken since. Only chews, endlessly, even when there's nothing in his mouth. And so, dear listener, remember, in her court, the bread didn't rise. It remembered, it saw, it judged, and it fed you to yourself, one crumb at a time. You begin with silence, not prayer, not reverence, silence, because saints, like all meat, must be tenderized. He came from the eastern provinces, young, glowing, with eyes the color of rain and hands that healed simply by being held. The people called him Anselm the Pure, said he could bless crops with a whisper, said he once kissed a dying child and the fever fled like a beaten dog. They believed he was chosen, that God had stitched his soul into his bones with golden thread. He walked barefoot, ate little, spoke less, but what he said, people remembered. He came to the palace on foot, alone, carrying nothing but a rosary made from apple seeds and a book that had no words, just blank pages he claimed were filled if you truly believed. He was not summoned. He arrived unannounced. A mistake. He sought the queen not to flatter her, but to warn her. He entered her court during a banquet, paused at the doors, raised his hand. The room went still. Even the cutlery stopped clinking. He stepped forward, did not kneel. You have feasted on flesh and fear, he said, but you have not tasted judgment. The queen didn't blink. She simply set down her chalice, black glass, rimmed with something pearlescent, and gestured for him to continue. Your hunger has no mouth, he said, only teeth. But God has given me fire, and fire forgets nothing. She stood, walked toward him, looked him over like one might inspect a pomegranate, checking for bruises, imagining the weight of it in the hand. Then she smiled. "So you're the dessert," she whispered. He was taken that night, not to the dungeons, to the kitchens, bound not with chains, but with questions, each one etched into his skin with a stylus made of bone. Where's your God now? Do saints rot like the rest? If your blood is holy, does it taste different? They prepared him carefully, not out of cruelty, out of respect, because cooking a saint is not like cooking a traitor or a priest or a poet. You must not rush it. The queen gave instructions herself. No fire. Saints burn clean, and she wanted to keep the flavor. Instead, they soaked him in milk infused with lavender and regret. They shaved his skin, not for cleanliness, for ritual. They whispered old names into his ears until he began to speak in languages lost to stone. And when he stopped breathing, he didn't die. He simply cooled, as if the divinity had stepped out for a moment. That's when they began the real preparation. The queen called it communion. She had the body carved into perfect cuts, symmetrical, almost surgical. The ribs were lacquered with fig and smoke. The heart, left whole, was set in a bowl of honey and nettle. The tongue, wrapped in gold leaf, was served on toast. The eyes were never touched. They watched the entire meal from a silver dish, still weeping. Only the queen ate that night. The court watched. She chewed slowly, reverently. With every bite, her face changed. Not softened, not hardened, just shifted, as if the saint's memories were trying to wear her. She swallowed the last of him with wine made from grapes grown in grave soil, then stood, closed her eyes, and for one brief moment, the candles in the palace flickered backward, as if time had inhaled. She opened her mouth and sang, a note so high, so cold, so ancient that even the windows cracked. In the weeks that followed, people whispered that miracles began to happen in reverse. Children who had survived the plague died again. Crops that had bloomed withered overnight. A blind man who had once seen the queen forgot what eyes were. The queen began to glow, not brightly, not warmly, just faintly, like a saint's halo, but cracked. One scribe wrote, "She has digested grace." Now it ferments. Centuries later, in a monastery hidden in the cliffs near the old capital, monks still keep a sealed jar. Inside, a sliver of bone, said to be the saint's. The jar cannot be opened, not because of magic, because it sings, and no one wants to hear the second verse. So if you ever feel holy, if your faith warms your chest, if your prayers feel sharp and certain, be careful. She might smell it on you. And remember, you are never too sacred to be served. His name was Orin, chief scribe, royal historian, keeper of the word. He wore gloves when he handled the scrolls, not for preservation, but because some of them bit. He had read more lies than any man alive, and more truths than anyone should. He spoke 5 languages, dreamed in 7, had a memory so sharp it once caused a priest to weep just from being remembered. He lived inside the library. And no, that's not a metaphor. He slept beneath the 5th shelf of the western wing, in a bed carved from discarded indexes. He ate bread baked in the shape of forgotten letters. He rarely left. Why would he? The library was a cathedral of knowledge, a temple, a tomb, and he its faithful undertaker. He had one rule: everything must be recorded, especially the things no one wants remembered. And so, he recorded the queen. He documented her rise, her edicts, her appetites, the way her crown fused with her skull, and her tongue grew heavier every winter. He described her feasts in meticulous detail, down to the seasoning of ribs and the facial expression of each guest at the moment of swallowing. He even noted the peculiar scent that lingered in the throne room after one of her laughs. Like wet parchment and extinguished stars. No one stopped him. Why would they? He was just a librarian, unarmed, unimportant, invisible, and that's what made him dangerous. One day he found it. A pattern. Not her laws. Not her feasts. In her forgettings. He noticed names disappearing, not from memory, but from the very page. Whole paragraphs that had once been filled with dates, titles, crimes suddenly blank. Not scratched out. Evaporated. Like the ink had realized what it contained and chosen to leave. And he was the only one who remembered what had been there. He began compiling a secret archive. A second record, written by candlelight, with a quill carved from a crow's bone. He bound the pages with hair, his own at first, then others. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, only wrote. Because if she could devour flesh, perhaps she could devour narrative. And if so, who would survive her story? He called the manuscript The Queen's Teeth, a chronicle of chewed time. Inside, he wrote everything. The barrel of the poet, the whispering bread, the saint's tongue melting in a priest's mouth. He wrote of the secret room under the throne. He wrote of the forest that fed her. He even wrote of himself and what he feared she would do when she found out. But then he stopped writing, abruptly, mid-sentence. Page 733, last line. She is standing behind me, and I... And that's all. When they found the library the next morning, it was wrong. The air tasted like ink. The torches wouldn't stay lit. And there was a smell like fresh parchment soaked in sweat and regret. Orrin was gone. No blood. No note. No gloves. Only his pen, still warm. The Queen never mentioned him. When asked, she said, "Books are like mouths. Eventually, they must be closed." But the manuscript? It survived, hidden in the hollow spine of a tax ledger, found decades later by a palace janitor who could not read but claimed the book breathed. Scholars debate its authenticity. The ink smudges. The handwriting shifts halfway through, like someone else had taken over. Some say Orrin lives still, bound into the book, watching through its words. Today, the manuscript is kept sealed in a monastery, deep in the northern cliffs. Chained, blessed, unread, because anyone who finishes it, anyone who reads that last line and wonders what comes next, disappears, not dies, vanishes, as if they were never written in the first place. And if you ever dream of pages turning in the dark, of footsteps behind you as you write, of teeth in the margins, then maybe she's reading you now, and maybe your ending is already written. It happened once a year. No fixed date, no celestial alignment. It arrived when the Queen declared it was time. When the wind shifted, when the rats stopped screaming, when the scent of clove and sweat began to seep from the palace walls like memory gone rancid. They called it the Festival of Devouring. For 3 days, the kingdom transformed. Shops closed, churches locked. Every clock was turned backward. Every mirror was covered with black velvet and salted string. Not out of mourning, out of respect. Because during the festival, time did not pass. It was fed. The rules were simple. We're the Queen. Eat what you were given. Speak no names. Failure meant disappearance, not death. Absorption. Let's begin with the masks. You were expected to make your own. Each citizen, child or elder, noble or peasant, was required to fashion a likeness of the Queen. Not her official portrait, her true face. And everyone had a different idea of what that looked like. Some made masks from porcelain and ash, delicate and expressionless. Others carved them from old bone, with too many teeth and lips sewn shut. Some smeared wax across their faces until they could no longer see. Some cut, and in every corner of the kingdom, for 3 nights, you would see her face everywhere. Hundreds, Thousands, smiling, blinking, weeping, the queen among her people, or the people as their queen. Next, the feast. Not one table, not one hall. The entire city became the table. Food appeared in doorways, on windowsills, in the mouths of statues. Roasted meats shaped like kneeling men. Puddings that shivered when touched. Bread that bled when broken. No one asked where it came from. No one asked what it was. Because the rule was, eat, even if it wept, even if it moved, even if it whispered your mother's name. At the palace, the queen hosted her own feast. Private, silent. Her mask was not made. It was real. She sat at the head of a long, black table. Alone, except for the chairs. Each one filled with a guest who had betrayed her in some small way. A forgotten vow, an unpaid tithe, a dream where her name was spoken aloud. They were seated, dressed, prepared, and as the clock reversed each hour, she would take a bite. Just one, from each, with no music, no applause, just the slow chewing of vengeance, softened with wine. On the third night came the procession, thousands in masks, walking backwards through the city, carrying platters of offerings, teeth, tongues, old letters, regrets too heavy to carry alone. And at the very end of the line, a child, always a child, dressed in red, crowned with thorns made of licorice and wire. The child would step forward and announce, "We are no longer ourselves. We are her, and we are hungry." Then the fires would be lit. The fire was never just fire. It burned without smoke. Color green, sometimes blue, once white, so bright it made even the shadows vanish. They called it cleansing. They fed it with masks, with prayers, with truths. Some wrote confessions on their arms and walked into the flames. Others threw in pieces of themselves, fingers, eyes, teeth, so the queen would see them as beautiful. Those who survived were never the same. They smelled like wood and secrets. They spoke only in recipes. When the sun rose on the fourth day, the city would awaken. Masks gone, streets clean, bodies missing. Only a faint taste in the air remained, like sugar boiled too long, or history trying not to be remembered. And the queen? She would return to her throne, silent, content, a little heavier, a little quieter. 1 year, a servant found a seed lodged between her teeth. It sprouted the next day, into a flower no botanist could name. Its petals were the color of old flesh. And it hummed. They say the festival ended with her death, but no one can agree on when or if she died. And sometimes, in the oldest parts of the city, a mask appears on your doorstep, made of wax, soft, still warm, and inside it a note. We begin again. You're the first course. They named him Elias. No surname, no lineage, just Elias. He was born in the corridor between the nursery and the punishment hall, a strange, liminal place where new life met old death. The midwives whispered that he emerged with his eyes open, not in wonder, not in fear, but with a look of tired recognition. He didn't cry, one said. He sighed, like he'd been here before. By his second year, Elias could speak. Not baby words, not half-gurgled syllables. Full sentences, clear, measured, heavy, like the voice of someone used to not being believed. He pointed at paintings and recited names no one had taught him. He corrected the palace historian during a reading, named kings whose bones had long turned to dust, described corridors sealed since the fire. He told the cook how to make the queen's favorite dish, one that hadn't been served in 40 years. They thought he was possessed. They were wrong. He was simply remembering. The queen heard of him. Of course she did. You don't run a kingdom built on fear and flesh without hearing the whisper of anomalies. At first, she dismissed it. Another child omen. A curse in a crib. She'd eaten 3 such infants before breakfast once. But then someone brought her a drawing, scrawled by Elias. Crude, childish, yet unmistakable. It showed her, not the queen of now, the queen before the crown, before the gluttony, before the forgetting. Hair loose, face gentle, and beneath it, the words in a shaky hand. I remember when you were kind. She summoned him. He was 4, dressed in a tunic too big for his frame, sleeves dragging like regret. He entered the throne room without bowing, looked around, and said, "You've moved the windows." She froze, because yes, she had. Decades ago, after a particularly vivid dream. No one knew. No one should have known. She asked him, "Who are you?" He replied, "I'm the one who didn't forget." That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because she remembered too. Tiny flashes. A song. A name. A hallway flooded with light instead of blood. The memories tasted strange. Like a spice she hadn't used in years. Like hope undercooked. She ordered the boy watched. Not killed. Not yet. She wanted to see how much he would remember. And he remembered everything. Not just of the queen. Of the palace. The buried library. The whispering trees beyond the walls. He recited the secret language once used by the stonemasons. He described the original shape of the throne, when it was still a seat of mercy, not iron. He even spoke of the queen's mother. Her voice. The way she smelled of rosemary and steel. She said you were born soft, he told her, and she wept when you changed. The queen began visiting him in secret, not to interrogate, to listen. He would talk. She would sit. Sometimes she cried, not loudly, just enough to wet her lips. Once, he told her a bedtime story she used to love as a child. She fell asleep in her throne that night for the first time in years. But something changed. The boy's memories grew sharper. He began remembering things he shouldn't. Conspiracies, buried crimes, the names of the queen's enemies, and what she did with them. He began sketching what he called the before, drawings of what the kingdom used to be, when the sky had color and laughter didn't echo. And worse, he began sharing them, first with servants, then guards, then, somehow, with the people outside the palace. A guard found a page tucked into his armor one night. A note in the boy's handwriting. She was not always like this. Neither were you. The queen snapped, not in rage. In panic, she summoned her scribes, ordered every mention of Elias erased, burned his drawings, locked him in a windowless room with only ink, paper, and bread. And yet, he kept remembering, kept writing, not in ink, in blood, on the walls, on his own skin, until finally, one night, he vanished. Not escaped, not killed, vanished. The guard swore he was there before midnight. And then, nothing. No breath, no warmth, just a scrap of parchment left behind. A single phrase. "If you forget me, I become you." Years later, during a festival, a baker found a small boy sitting near her stall. He asked for a sweet roll. When she handed it to him, he looked up and smiled. "Thank you," he said. "I remember your father. He used to sing." She blinked. Her father had died 30 years ago, and the song he used to sing, no one remembered it, not even her, until that moment. So if you ever meet a child who seems too quiet, who stares a second too long at old paintings, who hums a tune your grandmother once sang, be gentle. They're not dangerous. They're just remembering. For all of us. And if they tell you a story you don't want to hear, listen, because forgetting is how the queen was born. But remembering, that's how she ends. They say no one forged it, that it simply appeared, not on a pedestal, not in a vault, but in her hands one morning at dawn, while she stood barefoot on the balcony, watching the sky forget how to blush. It wasn't shaped like a typical crown. No arches, no filigree, no polished gems shimmering with divine approval. It was blunt, jagged, crude, a circle of human teeth interlocked root to root like a garland of old decisions. Each molar yellowed, each canine slightly chipped, the incisors arranged like a sneer that had hardened into metal. It looked more like a warning than a symbol, and it pulsed when touched. The queen didn't flinch. She placed it on her head with both hands, gently, reverently, as if crowning herself was an apology. The teeth sank slightly into her scalp, not deep, just enough to stay. And then they grew. New ones appeared overnight, not forged, emerged, sprouting through the ivory band like fungi through rot. Small at first, then longer, then sharper. They didn't fall off. They didn't die. They just accumulated. Soon, the crown had a second row, then a third. By the fourth, it had begun to whisper. Not words, gnashing, like 1,000 tiny mouths chewing on the silence. She began to wear it always, even while bathing, even while sleeping, though the servants said she no longer needed to sleep. And when she walked, people swore the crown moved slightly. Not with the wind, not with her step, with intent, like it was scanning, judging, choosing. Now, here's where the myths differ. Some say the teeth were her victims. Others say they were gifted, that each subject was expected, required even, to donate one tooth at adulthood. Not from the back, from the front. Something visible. A smile is, after all, just a mouth preparing for violence. The royal dentists were the busiest men in the kingdom. They traveled from village to village with velvet pouches and bone pliers. No anesthesia, only poems. Children recited them while their teeth were pulled. A tooth for her love. A tooth for her peace. A tooth so our screaming. And hunger may cease. If you refused, you disappeared. Not instantly. Gradually. People would forget your name. Then your face. Then the fact that you'd ever had a face to begin with. By the time your body was gone, you were already myth. But the queen? She remembered every tooth. She could tell you whose it was and why it was taken. That molar? A traitor's last smile. That canine? A liar who bit her own tongue. This one here, near the brow? A child who laughed at me. She never lied about the teeth. They were her archive. And then came the dreams. She began waking in the middle of the night, clawing at her jaw, whispering. They're chewing again. Her advisors thought she was mad. Her physicians checked for infection. But the crown kept growing. It now extended down the back of her skull. A mane of enamel, clicking softly as she moved. When she sat on her throne, it echoed. Teeth on stone. A dry, rattling sound like applause from a mausoleum. Some said the crown was alive, that it needed feeding. Once a year, she'd choose a courtier at random, take them into the hall of quiet biting. No one knew what happened inside, only that the person came out smiling, always smiling, with lips torn open and teeth missing. They'd return to their duties, silent, grinning, eyes wide as cellars. No blood, just obedience. Eventually, she stopped aging, not froze, paused, like she was waiting for the world to catch up. Her skin remained pale, her breath faint, but her crown, her teeth, kept growing. One day, a page noted, it no longer sits upon her head. She sits beneath it. When the queen finally vanished, if you believe she did, she left no body, no clothes, only the crown, found resting on the throne, gently gnashing, as if dreaming of her. The guards refused to touch it. A scribe tried once. His hand bled for a week. Not from a cut, from biting marks. He swore he hadn't put it near his mouth. And yet, today, the crown sits in a glass case. Locked. Sealed. The case is lined with salt and rosemary and mirrors that face inward. And still, once a year, always at dusk, the security cameras pick up a sound. Soft, rhythmic, gnawing. And if you lean in close enough, you may hear it whisper something meant just for you. We took your tooth already. We're just waiting for the rest. He had no name. Not anymore. He'd had one once, common, forgettable, like Thomas or Ewan or John. But that name had been swallowed somewhere between his last prayer and his first scream. Now people just called him the Eater. He wasn't born in the palace. He wasn't born in the kingdom. He was born outside, far beyond the Queen's reach, in the hushed lands where maps refused to go. Raised among monks who drank from cracked skulls and read prophecies carved into fingernails. He grew up hungry, but not for food. For reversal, his mentor once said, he's not starving for bread. He's starving for the end of appetite. He came to the kingdom wrapped in rags and silence. Lean, broad-shouldered, eyes the color of ash and afterthought. He didn't speak. He chewed. Rocks, branches, a coin once in front of a crowd. Swallowed a whole. Never passed it. When asked what he did for a living, he simply opened his mouth. Inside, teeth upon teeth. Not rows. Layers. Not human. Something else. He was captured quickly. Of course he was. No one walks into the Queen City looking like that and lives long. They brought him to the palace. Not to be killed. To be studied. The Queen was curious. A man who could chew stone? She wanted to taste his tongue. Their first meeting was a banquet. He was seated opposite her, naked from the waist up, chained, though he didn't struggle. She wore a new crown that night, made from knuckle bones, polished until they gleamed like ivory lies. The table was set, silver plates, red candles, dishes that blinked when uncovered. She smiled at him. They say you eat everything, she purred. Tell me, do you like the taste of queens? He didn't answer, just stared, and then, without a word, he reached down and bit through his own finger. Clean, effortless, laid the severed digit on his plate, chewed, swallowed, smiled. That night, the Queen dreamt of a forest made entirely of mouths. Each tree moaned, each leaf whispered, he's coming. You taste like weakness. She awoke shaking, sweating honey, clutching her throat like it wasn't hers. The next day, she summoned him privately. No guards, no food, just 2 chairs and the sound of something dripping behind the walls. She asked him, "What are you?" He replied, finally, voice like broken bread crusts and forgotten lullabies. "I'm the consequence." What happened next isn't entirely clear. Some say she tried to seduce him, offered him a throne beside hers, or perhaps beneath. Others say she offered her arm, saying, "Start small." But he refused. He didn't want her crown. He didn't want her throne. He wanted the thing beneath her ribs. She attacked first. Of course she did. Her jaw unhinged, literally like a serpent birthing a scream. She bit at his face. He bit back. They wrestled, not with hands, with mouths. Each bite a question, each swallow an answer. The floor cracked. The walls moaned. Some say time itself blinked. And then silence. The doors burst open. There she was, alone, or what remained of her. Hollowed, eyes intact, skin unbroken, but her insides gone, as if she'd been eaten from the inside out. The eater was never found. The throne remained warm. And in the days that followed, the servants noticed something new. A soft crunching sound, always nearby, under the floorboards, behind the tapestries, inside the throne itself, as if someone was still chewing. Now, every monarch who's taken the throne since, they've aged faster, grown quieter, and eventually disappeared. No body, just a smear of saliva on the cushion, and a faint smell of teeth. Some say the eater lives on, not in flesh, in hunger, in every story whispered late at night, in every bite you take when no one's watching. So if one day you wake up starving, for something you can't name, ask yourself, is it me that's hungry, or something inside me? Because the Queen was not defeated. She was devoured, and he's still chewing. It was brought to the palace from the Eastern Isles, wrapped in lambskin, carried by 12 silent monks with their mouths sewn shut, not as punishment, but as preventative measure, because even describing the mirror had consequences. They called it the window of not me, carved from obsidian, polished with bone dust and seawater drawn from a drowned monastery. Not reflective in the traditional sense, more reactive. When you looked into it, it didn't show your face. It showed your absence, what you were without lies, without charm, ritual, makeup, power. What was left when the stories stopped speaking for you? It didn't offer flattery. It didn't offer horror, just truth. And in the Queen's kingdom, that was the most offensive act imaginable. The Queen didn't want it. At first, she called it vulgar, primitive, an object for peasants who've forgotten the poetry of denial. But when she passed it in the throne hall one evening, it did something strange. It didn't show her reflection. It showed the young girl she used to be, in the garden, barefoot, staring at a butterfly, mouth open, no hunger in her eyes, no cruelty on her tongue, just wonder. She stopped. She stared, and then she screamed. She had it moved to the dungeon. No light, no visitors, but the image haunted her. She began seeing it in puddles, in polished goblets, in the wide, glassy eyes of those she consumed. She ordered all mirrors removed from the palace. Even knives were dulled to avoid reflection. Yet still it followed, because it hadn't been a trick. It had been a memory. Eventually, curiosity gnawed through fear. She ordered the mirror brought to her chambers. Lit by a single candle, she sat before it. Alone, no crown, no paint, no robes of woven illusion. And when she looked in, it showed nothing. Not a girl, not a queen, just a chair, and the walls behind it. She wasn't there. She struck it. Once, twice, with rings, with fists, with a jewel-crusted scepter stolen from a dead lover. No crack, no sound, only silence that pressed against her ears like thick snow. The servants say she sat there all night, whispering, "Where am I? Why won't it see me?" The next day, something was different. Not in the Queen, in the mirror, because it began to change for others. Servants who cleaned the chamber found that when they passed too near it, the glass would ripple, show not just their reflections, but their secrets. The kitchen boy who poisoned soup, the maid who stole a single pearl every month, the guard who kissed a rebel in the rain. It exposed them, not loudly, not cruelly, just visibly, and one by one they were punished. Because the Queen now believed the mirror, and if she couldn't see herself, then no one deserved to hide. Soon, the mirror became a tool. Interrogations were held before it. Confessions were demanded from those who didn't even know what they'd done. Children were brought, made to look. Some went mad. Others wept. One girl smiled and said, "It showed me hugging my mother." That's a lot. But the Queen? She visited it every night, like a ritual, sat before it, waited, begged. Sometimes she'd offer it pieces of herself. Hair, tears, fragments of memory. One night she whispered, "Please, just let me exist, even if I'm monstrous." The mirror remained blank. One day, a servant reported that the mirror had fogged, not with breath, with smoke, thin black tendrils curling inside the glass like a dream decomposing. The Queen rushed to see it, and there, for the first time in weeks, it showed something new. Not her, not the girl, a figure, wrapped in shadow, teeth too many, hands too long, eyes like bite marks in silk. It spoke no words, but it mouthed one. Soon, that night, the Queen didn't sleep. She ordered her chamber burned, the mirror destroyed. But when the fire died, the mirror remained, untouched, cold, and now reflecting something behind her. Today, the mirror is locked in a crypt beneath the palace. Or so they say. Scholars claim it's myth, that no glass could ever hold such power. But if you find yourself in an antique shop, and the mirror on the wall doesn't show you quite right. Check again. Is it a trick of the light? Or is the mirror showing you something that has already left you behind? And if you disappear from it entirely, well, she's watching, and she wants a reflection back. It began, like most sins, with celebration. A victory over a nameless rebellion. A city retaken. A promise, once broken, now sealed with salt and fire. The queen, bloated with triumph, declared a feast unlike any before. Not a dinner, not a banquet, a devouring. The invitations were carved into skin. Not parchment, skin, taken from rebels. Tanned, etched in gold leaf calligraphy, stitched closed with human hair, and hand-delivered by children who didn't blink. Each invite read, "Come, taste our future, or be tasted by it." They came, of course. Dukes, merchants, alchemists, the usual parasites in finer clothes. Even a few reluctant mystics. Not to eat, but to watch. They gathered in the Hall of Swallowing, a chamber built for echoes. The ceiling dripped condensation. The walls breathed, literally, covered in a living moss that exhaled with every heartbeat. Some said it was grown from the queen's own blood. Others believed it was the leftover skin of those who'd lied too beautifully to burn. The table? It had no end. A serpent of polished wood and fossilized ash, coiling through the hall, so long it had to bend back on itself. No one knew where it began. No one knew where it stopped. Each guest found a place already set. Plates shaped like open mouths. Cutlery curved like claws. Goblets made of skull caps that whispered when lifted. And the food. Oh, the food. First came the soup of regret. Boiled bones from fallen warriors. Flavored with ink scraped from love letters never sent. Served warm. Always warm. Then, the pastry of echoes. Flaky crust wrapped around a hollow center. When bitten, it screamed. Faintly, your own voice saying the thing you feared most. Rose carved from beasts no one recognized. Their eyes still blinking on the silver trays. Their breath still visible in the air. And bread. Endless bread. Soft. Sweet. Filled with teeth. At first, the guests laughed. Nervous chuckles. Jokes sharpened by expensive wine. They assumed it was theater. Some grotesque, royal satire. Until the queen arrived. And sat. And ate. No speech. No blessing. Just her fingers tearing into a loaf, smearing honey across her chin. She didn't use the provided utensils. She used her hands. And her mouth. And her silence. She stared at no one. And everyone. Then the waiters returned. Not men. Not women. Things. Gaunt. Smiling. Wearing masks carved from real faces. Some still twitching. They brought more food. But this time, the food looked familiar. A roasted thigh. A hand manicured. A face charred but recognizable. Someone gasped. It was the Chancellor, missing since last month. His monocle still glistened in the meat. Guests pushed back from the table. Some stood. One woman vomited into her lap. The queen never stopped chewing. She gestured, and the doors closed. Sealed. From the outside. Then came the final course. No tray. No server. It rose from the table itself. A mirror, shaped like a platter. And in it, each guest saw themselves. On the table. Cooked. Seasoned. Plated. Their own bodies. Their own faces. Staring back. Smiling. Panic erupted. Screaming. Fist pounding on walls. One man tried to jump out a stained glass window, but bounced back. As if the glass were breathing. As if it wanted to watch. And still, the queen ate. Slow. Methodical. Each bite a punctuation mark. Each chew a sermon. And then, something happened. The table began to eat back. Forks twisted. Spoons grew teeth. Chairs sprouted fingers pulling guests down. Plates swallowed hands. The wine turned black, writhing like snakes in glass. One woman was dragged beneath the table by something hungry. She didn't scream, just sighed, like Elias had, like someone finally remembering. By the time the doors were opened again, 3 days later, the hall was empty, except for the queen, sitting alone, at the head, the table gone, no food, no plates, just silence, and her smile, wider than before, her belly barely rising with breath. She looked at the servants and whispered, "Delicious, but next time, bring me someone I love." Some say she was never satisfied again, that every meal after was tasteless, every feast hollow, because how do you top a menu made of memory? Of guilt? Of you? Today, if you're ever invited to dine in a hall with no shadows, don't eat, don't sit, don't look at your plate, because if you do, you'll see yourself there, perfectly seasoned, perfectly cooked, waiting, smiling. The first time she was heard, it was winter. The fire had died early. The palace cold had teeth. And in the long hush between midnight and morning, a servant paused while dusting a shelf and heard, whispering, not near, not far, not outside, inside the wall. At first, they blamed the pipes, blamed the wind, blamed the mice. But mice don't lullabies. Pipes don't say your name, and wind doesn't cry. Not like that. They tried to ignore it, but the sounds grew bolder. Scratching, scraping, the occasional quiet giggle. Books knocked from shelves. Mirrors found smeared with tiny handprints. Cold spots blooming in the shape of a child's silhouette. And always the scent. Something like old lavender and rust. The smell of a room no one enters anymore. Eventually, the queen noticed. Not the noises, the pattern. Because the girl in the walls never made a sound in her presence. Not a creak, not a whisper, just silence. But in every room the queen left, within minutes, the girl would arrive and rearrange things. Subtly, painfully, the queen's quills dipped in vinegar. A ring turned backwards on her nightstand. A scroll folded precisely into a paper swan, then burned halfway through. Little things, but things only someone very close would dare touch. She demanded an exorcism. They brought a priest who reeked of wine and rosary beads. He lasted 2 days. On the third, he was found inside the wall, folded, not crushed, folded, like cloth, eyes wide open, mouth still moving, whispering a child's rhyme over and over. One for blood, one for bone, one for the queen, who eats alone. The queen flew into rage, ordered the walls opened. Room by room, the palace was gutted. Panels torn, nails pulled, stones scraped to marrow. They found nothing. No bones, no toys, no girl. Just a hole, a tunnel, winding deep into the walls, into the palace's memory. Some claimed it was a servant child, left behind after the Great Fire. Others believed it was the queen's first daughter, the one erased from records, the one whose name the queen never spoke, the one born without a tongue. There was even a theory that she wasn't a girl at all, but the ghost of guilt itself. Small, feminine, persistent. The echo of someone not devoured properly. And still, she lingered. Scribes reported ink spilled in patterns. Letters rewritten in different hands. One night, the queen received a note on her pillow. "I remember you. You told me to hush." I hushed. "Why won't you?" Her paranoia deepened. She stopped sleeping. Would only speak in daylight. Had her room padded with moss and wax to muffle sound. But the girl remained. Sometimes visible. Just the faintest outline behind the walls. Sometimes heard. A song hummed backwards. A knock that sounded like a heartbeat. And then, one morning, the queen's voice was gone. Not hoarse. Gone. No sound passed her lips. She clawed her throat raw. Nothing. She wrote notes furiously. But each time she tried, the words twisted. She'd write, "Help me." It read, "Hush now." She tried to scrawl her name. The ink bled into a drawing. A small girl, smiling, standing behind her. That was the last day anyone saw the queen. The guards heard laughter echoing through the walls. Not malevolent, not cruel, just innocent, childlike. And when they broke open her chamber, she was gone. No body, just the faint scent of lavender and dust. And on the wall, a message written in tiny handprint smears. Finally, you're quiet too. Now, the palace denies her ever existing. They say there was no girl, no whispers, no queen. But late at night, visitors still hear footsteps behind the walls. Little ones, playful, pacing the halls like she owns them. And if you press your ear to the plaster and listen long enough, you'll hear her whisper, "Don't speak. She's sleeping." And if you whisper back, she might answer, in your voice. It didn't start with her wanting to live forever. She had no interest in eternity. Eternity was for gods and liars. What she wanted was simpler, crueler. She wanted to live long enough that everyone who had ever defied her, defied anything, would crumble into ash and forget why they were ever angry. She wanted to outlive resentment. The court physicians tried the usual tricks. Tinctures of youth, elixirs brewed in eclipse, bats blood stirred with opal dust. They even had her bathed in milk from women who had just given birth to their first sons. A recipe older than history and twice as cruel. But her skin still wrinkled, her hair still grayed, her teeth loosened, until one day she stopped the charade and said, "Feed me time." They misunderstood at first. One poor alchemist brought her a sandglass. She crushed it in her hands and licked the glass from her palms. "No, I want the kind that makes your mother die and your bones ache in rain." So the priests built a machine, ancient, rusted, humming with quiet despair. It had no wires, no levers, just a chair and a knife and a clock with no hands. They brought in prisoners. They made them sit. The queen watched from behind a curtain, always behind a curtain. The prisoner would close their eyes. The machine would hum. And when the process was done, they would look older, some aged 10 years. Others crumbled into dust right there, whispering for a mother who had died 3 centuries ago. And the queen? She would breathe it in, not deeply, not hungrily, just delicately, like someone sampling a wine they already owned. The aging stopped. Her wrinkles faded. Her voice grew low and warm again, velvet dipped in blood. But her eyes, they no longer blinked in rhythm. They pulsed like forgotten suns. As the years passed, decades folded behind her like a fan. Advisors died. Lovers wilted. Entire dynasties collapsed under her steady gaze. And still, she ruled. But not publicly. Not anymore. She was spoken of in past tense. Then whispered of in future tense. Then not at all. Because something strange began to happen. People stopped remembering. Not just her. Everything. Dates slipped. History unraveled. A century disappeared from the records. Then too, when scribes tried to reconstruct timelines, the ink bled. Numbers became symbols. Symbols became teeth. No one knew when wars happened anymore, or why. All they remembered was a woman in a chair, and a ticking sound that no longer needed a clock. The queen had become an absence. Not dead, not alive, a pause in the story of the world. One day, a traveler arrived. A woman with no age, no name, only a bell around her neck that never rang. She asked to see the queen. The guards laughed. There hadn't been a queen in living memory. But the woman only smiled and said, "Then why is it still midnight in this land?" And they froze. Because it was. Always had been. Every clock stuck at midnight. The sun never quite rose. The moon never quite left. A kingdom trapped in the moment before change. They took her to the throne room, where the queen sat, motionless, not statuesque, Statues erode. She didn't. Her body still, but not peaceful. Her mouth slightly open, as if about to say something she never dared. The traveler approached. She knelt, and from her sleeve, she produced a mirror. Small, cracked, made from time's first lie. She held it to the queen's face. Nothing reflected. Then the queen moved. Just a twitch, a breath. And for the first time in 1,000 years, she whispered. "How long?" The traveler replied. "Too long for forgiveness. Not long enough for forgetting." The queen stood. The walls shook. The bells rang. The clocks broke. And all across the kingdom, people aged at once. Children became dust. Elders crumbled into roots. Even stones cracked from the weight of sudden memory. Because when she stood, time returned. All of it. At once. And it was too much. She stepped forward. The traveler smiled. They embraced. Not in warmth. In mercy. And together, they vanished. Not in light. Not in fire. Just absence. Like a thought you almost had. But lost forever in a blink. And now, the world ticks again. But slower. Wounded. As if afraid of remembering too much. Every leap year is hers. Every unseasonal fog. Every nightmare of clocks laughing. She's not gone. Just waiting. Because you can't kill time. But sometimes, time eats back. They say the last thing she ate was herself. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. Not whispered in folk tales with wine-stained teeth and ironic laughs. She really did. Mouth open. Fingers first. Bone cracked. Skin tore. And there was no scream. Only the sound of someone who had finally found something tender enough to love. It didn't happen in the throne room. It happened in a chamber no map recorded. Somewhere beneath the stone. Deeper than the crypts. Past the roots of trees long dead. A place where the kingdom no longer reached. Where silence fermented into memory. Where breath became currency. They called it the belly. The queen went there alone. No procession. No guards. Just her shadow. And a hunger that had never stopped growing. She had devoured everything else. Cities, sun, sins, even time itself. But still she starved. Because appetite, when left unchecked, becomes identity. And identity, once devoured, leaves nothing behind. Inside the belly, the walls were made of teeth. Not decorations. Not carvings. Actual teeth. Human. Animal. Unknown. Each one embedded in the walls like accusations, frozen mid-scream. They pulsed. They clicked. Some hummed. Like the bones remembered what it meant to be bitten. In the center of the chamber stood a single table. No feast. Just a mirror. The same one, they say. The one that had once refused her face. It no longer glowed. No longer rippled. It simply waited. And beside it, a note. In handwriting not hers. It read, "You've eaten the world. What's left is you. Chew carefully." She sat, her hands trembling not with fear, but anticipation. She looked into the mirror, and this time, it showed her. Truly her. Not the queen. Not the hunger. Just the woman beneath it all. The little girl. The young tyrant. The lonely wife. The betrayed daughter. The broken lover. The liar, the mother, the void, all of her, layered like sediment, rotting but honest. She smiled, and for once, genuinely, she picked up the knife. It wasn't sharp, just inevitable. She began with the tongue, a symbolic gesture. She had spoken enough, lied enough, seduced and screamed and swallowed enough. It came off easily, no blood, just a small, soft sigh. Then the fingers, each one placed on the table like offerings. Then her left eye, then the skin beneath her ribs, the place where all her guilt had been stored, like bruised fruit in a hollow chest. And all the while, the teeth on the walls watched. Some even smiled. By the end, there was little left. Just breath. Just presence. She took that too. And when the last bite was done, the mirror cracked. Not loudly, just a single hairline fracture across the glass. And from it, a voice. "Thank you." No one found her body. There was no tomb, no grave, just silence in the palace. And an empty chair that no one dares sit in. Because some say she's still there. Not in spirit, not in memory, but in ritual, in the little things. A fork you can't quite find, a craving you can't explain, a reflection that lingers too long. Every time you bite your lip, every time you swallow pride, every time you eat your words, you feed her. And when the world becomes loud again, when cruelty grows teeth and kingdoms forget how to dream, she will return, not as a woman, but as a hunger, as a question you can't unchew. What happens after the last bite? No one knows, because the queen didn't leave behind a recipe, only an appetite and a warning. Do not eat what you cannot mourn. Sleep well now, dear listener. The queen is full, for now, but the night is long, and something in your bones still smells like mercy